Scott, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a delight to have you here with me once again.
Great to be back with you, and thank you for inviting me.
Now, the second season of the Dealist has focused on AI and how it's being used in an M&A process. We started off by looking at demystifying some of the common misconceptions that there are around M&A with Bain. We discussed best practices for safeguarding data and privacy with Hengeler Müller. We spoke to Machado Maya, who are using AI to bring efficiencies to their operational processes and also create new revenue streams. And then most recently, we've learned from Korn Ferry about how corporate development is beginning to integrate technology into their workflows. Now, the consensus amongst all our guests has been that education and training is really critical to the success of using an AI in an M&A process, especially since there's a huge amount on the line. Despite there being 30 to 40 billion US dollars being invested in GenAI, a recent MIT study actually revealed a really surprising fact to me. In fact, 95% of organizations are seeing zero returns on that investment. And I'm really curious, Scott, start us off. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, actually, to some degree, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by how much is being spent, because clearly this is a critical issue in the way that deals are going to have to be done moving forward. But I'm not surprised that the return isn't there yet. I mean, if I think of it in this way, Catherine, it's like learning to drive. And I think what the problem is right now is that people are talking about trying to drive in the fast lane, or perhaps even being a Formula One track and going around on a racetrack, when they're just learning how to drive. And you don't start that way. And I think we're at the learner's permit section here. We're driving with mom or dad in the passenger seat telling us what to do. We're trying to understand what the signals are, but also what we're doing. And if we accept that we are going to get better and we are going to learn how to use it better, that the system will be better, and that the car that we're going to drive in 5 years is going to have more bells and whistles and be easier to drive, then I think we can accept that right now we're not seeing that return. That investment is necessary, however, just like you all need to do the same thing when you're learning to drive.
So do you think that it's fair to say that companies are investing enough in AI per se, but maybe not necessarily in training people on how to effectively use AI in a corporate development in an M&A process?
Well, that's exactly why I picked that as a particular example, because when you learn to drive, you do have to spend time with people who do it better than you. You do have to learn. You have to read the manuals. You have to understand the whole system and what's being done. It doesn't mean that you have to understand how the engine works, but you do need to understand what the whole ecosystem that surrounds it and what makes it better, but also how to drive better. And I think we're learning right now how to drive the AI, and especially the Gen AI, which is the way most people are interacting with AI systems that are in place right now.
Let's take a step back. Now, your institution it's educating tomorrow's deal makers. Now, when it comes to AI, how does Bayes' methodology compare to other business schools? And how do you sort of approach the topic?
Well, first off, I can most speak about how we are dealing with it, but I believe that most business schools are probably following fairly similar processes. One of the things that we are doing is we're telling every single faculty member that they need to think about how they're embedding AI into the classroom. And that means not just in terms of what you're doing in terms of telling the students how it's going to be or how it might be used in the future and how to do the processes better. But it is actually there now in the coursework and in the exams in order to be able to make sure that we are sending out AI literate graduates into the companies who are hiring here from the business school. And I think that's actually very important. because those are going to be the people who are going to be right at the coalface, probably using AI on a day-to-day basis, even more than the people who are supervising them.
And do you feel that there's any danger that the younger professionals could lean sort of too far, too heavily onto AI tools and lose some of those really critical, softer skills, human intuition that's really vital in deal making?
Well, great question. But in fact, we are all aware of that particular issue and why that might be an issue for graduates who are out there. There's a lot of discussion taking place about the apprenticeship model of business, that in fact you have to work hard at the very beginning, doing some very mundane tasks to get a feeling about what the totality is of the business, and that you are going to be doing some pretty mundane things and repetitive things, but understanding that the process has worked for generations, that you do apprentice to somebody who is more expert to understand how the whole process from a holistic perspective is working. I think AI only enhances the ability to be able to do that, because it should make those mundane tasks quicker. Remember, at the moment, AI could probably better described as, a sophisticated Google search, and many people treat it that way. And it's just an aggregator of search results. But you know what? It's a very good and efficient aggregator of those search results, and they do it better than what you've done before. So indeed, actually, if it's done properly, you are able to then spend more time thinking about how you're going to present that data, and spending more time with the person more senior in the organization, talking about what the implications are going to be, because you don't have to spend as much time doing those Google searches or whatever that search might be. And certainly with this coming through from Intralinks here, for example, going through all that data on a line by line basis, but instead are using the embedded AI in the Intralink system in order to be able to give you the data that you can then analyze better in order to be able to present it and get that gut feel.
Thank you, Scott. Now, when you and I had a conversation preparing for this podcast, you raised a really interesting point, this question of AI hallucinating, and also the importance of always checking what you're being told. And that not necessarily something that is as ingrained in younger students than it is to some of the older people like us who've actually had to interact with sort of different types of sources and knowing what is a credible source and what isn't a credible source. Can you give us your take on that, please?
Well, let me first tell you what we do. You cannot put down as a source ChatGPT. You need to go beyond the answer that you're getting from the GenAI. And by the way, I'm not picking on ChatGPT. That could be Gemini, it could be Cloud, it could be Copilot, whatever is being used on that. And it was interesting. I was talking this week earlier with a senior person at one of the large banks here in London, who was saying that when a analyst comes and says, I got this on ChatGPT, she says to them, well, where did ChatGPT get that information? It's very nice to hear that that's what's being done out in industry, but we've been doing that already for a year or two at the university. We do not allow our students to say the source is from the GenAI system. We do require them to go beyond that to find what that credible source was, and then to use some judgment as to whether that indeed is a credible source or not. How do they do that? How do you understand what a credible source is? Okay, that's one of the things that we discuss in class. That's one of the things that obviously in a bank, somebody who's more senior is going to say to an analyst. So when they come back and say, I found this source from this particular location, they're going to say, well, actually, that's not as credible as, for example, going to the financial statements of the company itself.
I'd like to sort of move up the career ladder, so to speak, and spend some time talking about how mid-level professionals, so those people who've been doing deals for a while entirely without the aid of AI, how can they develop their AI literacy if it wasn't part of their education or indeed their early training? What would you recommend to those people to give them that extra confidence to interact with this particular tool?
Well, of course, the first thing I would say is come back and get your MBA, and go through business school again. But I know that's not going to be something that most people are going to end up doing. What I think they need to do is I think they need to have a little bit of humility. And that is that they are going to learn from some of the junior staff. Now, everybody always talks about the fact that you need to learn from those people who are more senior. But in this particular instance, you are going to find that you're going to have people who are very, very literate at using these AI systems, that are going to be working with people who are not quite as literate. Now, I think it's very hard for some of those people who are more senior, to admit that they have used a Gen AI. How would you respond if the managing director came to you and said, well, I used ChatGPT or Gemini or Cloud or Copilot to do this particular task? Probably the people in the organization are going to go, wait a second, he should have known that, or she should have known that anyway. So two things here. One, I think there are going to be people who are more senior who are using it, and they're using it surreptitiously. But the second thing is, and I think the more important thing is, which is what we were first getting at on this particular point, is they need to be humble and actually say to the people who are more junior, what is the best system for this? You've used it more. You've actually just recently graduated and had courses where you talked about the right way to put together prompts, the right way to ask ChatGPT where it got its information, and has indeed ChatGPT or Cloud or Gemini, has it hallucinated? And I should say, by the way, I hate the word hallucination in relation to Gen AI, because I actually think those Gen AI systems lie. Okay. And these are mistakes. And these are the kind of mistakes that we talk about in class are not allowed. And why am I actually saying lie? Because what those Gen AI systems do is they tend not to come back and say, I can't find the answer. What they do is they use their very logical, internal electronic minds to come up with a answer that sounds right, given what it can look at in the very large databases that it's going through. That to me is lying, because it's making it up because it couldn't find the answer. But anyway, that's just an aside here.
Well, no, I think that's a really interesting point. Now, before we take a break, I wanted to ask you, are you aware of any sort of types of corporate training or hands-on experience programs that make the biggest impact when leveling up those AI skills amongst sort of the more middle management? Or is this still sort of a work in progress?
Well, number one is it's a work in progress, and it will be a work in progress as the AI systems change, and they are changing quite significantly. And therefore these, whatever training you have today is not going to be the right training next year. And I mean it that soon. It may not even be the right training 6 months from now. It is important to provide people with training about AI, despite the fact that they seem very, very intuitive. And because these are natural language systems. That is, you can ask it a question like you were asking somebody sitting next to you in a pub, or you could ask your parents, or you could ask your kids. It sounds like it's quite natural, but indeed you do need to be thinking very carefully about how you do prompt to get the answers that you're having. That is a skill that you probably should be looking at getting some courses on. Now, I think there's a lot of good systems out there. There's a lot of podcasts on that. I know that Intralinks themselves has a number of those in terms of, how it can be used relating to the Intralinks due diligence databases, that people will be accessing. But it does take training. And I think you do need to spend some time to do it. As I want to just emphasize this point, it sounds like it should be natural, but you need to really test that natural, and you need to check the result, and you need to check where the data is coming from. And you do need to ask it several different ways. But you know what? Those are so quick that you can do that multiple times and get a much better answer than having done that manually the old fashioned way. And I'm even including just a simple, Google search, as a manual search at this point in time. In fact, actually, it's probably that kind of generation back.
Okay. Thank you very much, Scott. We're going to take a quick break. And once we come back, we're going to have a talk about how we can bridge the gap to those senior deal makers.
Intralinks Deal Center AI. Nail every detail with the revolutionary AI-powered platform that's built for deals. Transform your deal making with Deal Center AI. Intralinks. Go forward.
I said we were going to spend some time talking about senior deal makers. Now, I'm talking specifically about those senior deal makers who have vast experience of deal making, but who haven't necessarily engaged with AI so far. First of all, Scott, is that actually a correct assumption, or is it maybe the case that you were describing earlier, that they are surreptitiously using AI, but not necessarily telling everybody about it? Is there actually a situation that you can imagine where someone has not engaged with AI in the context of M&A at all, or is that not really the case?
I think there would be very few instances where they would not have come across the use of AI. But I think your question is more about whether they are using it themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
And in that instance, I think that except for some very superficial uses, most senior people that I've spoken with, have said, I really have not understood how to use AI properly at my level within the organization. I can see how the people who are more junior are using it in order to be able to automate tasks which are repetitive. But my job is not repetitive. My job is very different, and I don't yet see how AI can help me there. AI can help you even in its current state. It will be even more of a help, as it develops further over the course of the next several years, at least talking with the technologists as I have, about what is probably coming, in terms of GenAI. Even though that won't necessarily be the end either in the next couple of years, because this is a multi-year, if not decade, long journey that we are on. In terms of those senior people and for what they should do, again, let me come back to my car and driving analogy. You cannot become a good driver of a car by reading a textbook or by listening to a book. You actually have to get out there and get behind the wheel and hopefully start off on some back roads and slowly work your way until you're finally in the fast lane of the motorway, of the highway, and driving cross country. But you're not going to jump from having read the learner's manuals on how to drive a car, to driving cross country. And I think that that's the one message I would give to people who are more senior is practice. Try it in an example. And I know we're all so time constrained that somebody says, wait a second, the way I've done it for so long is the fastest way to do it. It will be inefficient at first. When you do those first prompts, it's going to give you the wrong example. The wrong answer. But you have to continue to practice it, and then you see where it is going to be useful and where you're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to use it there. You're not going to use a car to drive 2 blocks. You are going to use a car to drive cross town, or to another city. So there are some instances where you're going to say, wait a second, that wasn't the most efficient way to deal with it. I could have just walked and done it the old fashioned way. Other times you're going to say, wow, that's incredible. I was able to get there in 20 minutes, get my answer for the client in 20 minutes. And I thought I would have to ask my team to look at this and get the answer back to me by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we've spoken about in general in this series is the fast pace with which AI in an M&A process being used is evolving. We're seeing changes constantly coming in. And what I'd like to hear from you, Scott, now is your prediction into key areas in where we are going to see more and more use of AI. We know that AI is being used a lot in deal sourcing. We know that it's being used very effectively in due diligence. Looking ahead into the future, where do you see it being used more and more?
Well, I certainly agree, Catherine, with what you said about deal sourcing. And I think that goes from both the buy side and the sell side in terms of trying to identify perhaps, candidates on the buy side or on the sell side, that otherwise you might not have been able to find. And that's where the search, remember, at the moment, AI is a very much better search engine, but it's not for most applications in M&A, much beyond that. So great on the sourcing side, very good on the due diligence when you're dealing with large amounts of information and you have to be able to go through those large amounts of information. I would also say that it's being used more and more on the valuation and the pricing and therefore the financial side. Although, again, speaking with people in industry, they're telling me there's lots of errors there. I wouldn't yet use it necessarily for modeling. Okay. Mm-hmm. But in terms of looking, at that data, so maybe that actually overlaps with the due diligence side. But remember, there's lots of other areas of M&A. There's a lot of people working on the post-deal integration side. There's not much being done on that. You could think about AI being used better in negotiation. Just to give you an example on the negotiation side, wouldn't it be great, and we're not too far away from being able to do this, for you to be able to, if you were going to be negotiating a deal with me, that you go online and you tell the AI system that they want to create an avatar based on what's out there. Just even this video could be used for that. And then put the persona of the person that you want to do into that, who you're going to be meeting with, and you'll be able to get information about that. And then conduct in a practice interview, negotiation, with me, and get more comfortable with what you're likely to see. Now, that avatar is never going to give you the perfect response that you would expect to get, or it wouldn't be perfectly the same, the way you would be when you're in the real situation, but you'd feel more comfortable. So we're going to begin to see things like that are going to be able to come, and that will really help, and should help, in terms of what we're doing. Likewise, apply that same thing to the post-deal integration, where it's so much about the human element. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's not there yet. It will be within a couple years.
Scott, before I let you go back to your day job, tell me, are there any thought leaders or Substacks that you suggest to anyone interested in educating themselves about how to use AI in an M&A process that they could be reading and learning more about?
Well, first off, as I said earlier, talk to the people in your organization, who are just coming up, because they are the generation that will have been using ChatGPT, and it's like for just about everything. And they will not even have been doing Google searches, and we would have thought that they would have been. So the best sources are probably the people within your organization who are coming through, because they would know your organization best because they're already there. The second thing is, I think there are specialist areas out there. Again, I know this is not to put a plug in necessarily for Intralinks, but there are a number of different blogs and videos that Intralinks itself has, about how to use the processes that they have embedded into the VDR in order to be able to use it better. And talk to the people who are experts out there. Again, now this is just not a plug for academics, but you can go and talk to some of those people who are researching how this can be best used. And remember, those academics have to apply this every single day with people who are 20 to 25 years old who are growing up with that generation, in terms of how to apply that within every situation that we know we're going to send them out. Now, I'm talking about this from the situation of being in business school, but the same would be true if you happen to be in a research organization. You have, or almost any other organization. I could probably just go through all of them, but look at those people who are best applying it right now, ask them for advice, and I think you'll get some very good advice.
Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. But thank you very much, Scott, for joining the podcast today and sharing your wonderful analogy of how using AI in M&A is a little bit like learning to drive a car. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. We'd really love to hear from you. That's all that we have time for today. Thank you very much. And until next time, goodbye.